Last week we talked about a test plan that Anton had provided, and oops, go ahead and let people in. Last week we had talked about a test plan Anton had provided. We talked about some bulk SAI APIs to be implemented in BMV2. And so, and also this week was wondering if we wanted to talk more about a visual representation of the work we need to do. So maybe, oh, looks like people are still joining. Sorry, guys. Maybe I should give this meeting till about 10:07 to start. What do you guys think? Hi, Christina.
I think that would encourage the wrong behavior.
Okay, all right. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you guys see?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, great. So this is what we talked about last week, about Anton's test plan that he submitted, and here are the bulk SAI APIs. And so I was wondering though, this week, if it might be a good idea to maybe, instead of the list of work items we have in our project plan, maybe represent them. Maybe I could do it in a visual representation of the different blocks of the simulator, the compiler, the pipeline, and maybe we could look at the work in a different way. Chris, did you have a picture or?
Yeah, I can share.
Okay, yeah, let me stop sharing.
Yeah, get the right screen up.
Okay.
Give me a second.
Yeah, I don't know if a list of work items always resonates with people.
Give me a moment here.
Sure, no problem. Oh, VJ, I got your message from earlier.
Okay, cool.
Still trying to get this the right picture. I know I should have had this ready.
No, that's okay.
Okay, here we go. So this picture, let me know if you can see it yet.
I can see. Yeah, I can see.
1 bit per second uplink takes a while. So this is from the Dash workflow README under Dash pipelines. And I think what we need to talk about probably is changes to the P4C compiler and the changes to the behavioral model itself that are required. And also, we have libsci that's underway in order to make the behavioral model complete enough for Dash overlay. I think that's probably one of the topics at hand. Is that correct, Christina?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
I mean to do that. Does this diagram help put a couple of those things in perspective? We have this whole workflow working, but there's just elements that need, fleshing out. Will have to be a new Docker for the compiler to handle stateful constructs, a new backend for P4C or a modified one. And then we need our P4 code, the P4 code here that, is a work in progress. We need to enable those stateful behaviors, which are commented out right now. And, we need to continue to grow the SAI library, which I know Marian just put in a draft pull request for the bulk APIs, which is great. And Mark reviewed that, and we're just waiting for test cases so that we try to follow our best practices of having test cases go along with code. So hopefully that answers your request for a diagram, and we could simplify this for just this discussion.
Yeah, and I wonder if it would be useful to have like a explode, how like in a parts diagram, they'll zero in on a part like P4C and then they'll explode it out, and we could maybe have a view of what's needed in P4C, or I don't know, what does everyone think?
Like, how do the work items in our flat list, project list, relate to these things a little more pictorially, perhaps?
Yeah.
Or even just a list of kind of steps that have to be done in sequence so that we're done, right?
Yeah, yeah. How does that resonate with the rest of the team, guys?
I guess I was just curious, if you want such exploded diagrams, do we know, has anyone volunteered to take on those work items? They might be the best person to people to create such diagrams of what they're doing.
Well, I don't mind creating diagrams if I know what goes where. My problem is, I'm so high level, I don't exactly know what goes where all the time, but I'm always happy to draw. Chris likes to draw.
I mean, I could give you a very high level block diagram of, I think, pieces that I think need modification, but I'm probably not the person that's going to be making the changes. So I was just wondering if there were volunteers for people actually working on the changes.
Yeah, I had a comment for Chris. So Chris, I think the arrow from C to the purple box was there earlier, and momentarily we had shifted it to the lib side. I think it might be a good time to shift it back to straight.
You're saying this line here?
No, the dotted line arrow from C.
Oh, right. There was, yeah, you and I had a discussion about that, and I'm trying to remember what happened. I was going to do some modification.
Right. I think at that time, it was very, very long time ago, when we didn't have the site drift at that time, right? So now that we have site drift, the arrow needs to be straightened instead of pointing directly to lib side. I don't fully
You're
remember.
saying this should talk to this?
Yes.
Well, we still have some compiled C++ programs actually in the repo that do this exactly. It's not the best diagram. It's kind of, I took some shortcuts, but this is our Python drift client library. This is our workflow right now for PTF tests. So it does go through this way. But we have some trivial tests that we haven't even actually spent much time working on. There's only maybe one that just proved the library linked and ran. So we do have a C++ program that runs inside this container that just talks directly.
Okay.
So, yeah. But to your point, it probably could be represented a little better.
Sure.
This is almost like by the wayside now because we've gone beyond it.
Okay.
That's a good point. If a diagram raises questions, it needs improvement, regardless of my opinion on it. So thank you for the feedback.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. And
So I guess so. Just sorry to harp on this, but is anybody stepping up to change P4C or BMP2 for the enhancements, or is that just like everybody steps back and the one person who didn't is doing it?
Do you mean the drawing or the work items?
The work items, the coding.
Oh, yeah. The coding, we have a list of items in the GitHub project.
Okay.
I don't know if we have everything. I guess that's what I'm trying to get to is, once we have, the overall, the P4, the different pieces, then we could list and make sure we have everything underneath those.
No, we do have everything.
We do? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
we have everything in the project list, all the open items.
Yeah.
Maren?
At
Awesome.
least what's related to the changes in BMV2 and P4C.
Do we have
Wonderful.
a status of where it lies and when we might see light of day? What can you give us an idea of where things lie?
Not really, because I'm bouncing between different areas, and right now I saw a lot of things with the SAI API still, so I put that on hold. So yeah, cannot provide the exact date because SAI API take priority for now, because we need to move on with the SOniC changes that depend on SAI. So that there are guys from Microsoft that are working on SOniC, and we needed to provide everything for them. Now I'm doing the further improvements, and after that I'll start going back to I'll go back to the P4C changes, which, by the way, I didn't want to touch till till we figured out what we are doing with the Dockers. But I think we finalized that or not. Chris, did we merge the pull request that moves Dockers to
ACR?
Yeah.
No, yesterday I touched on it. I said, I know people haven't had a chance to dive in deep, but regardless, I'd like to merge it by the end of the week so we
By
can move
Friday.
forward.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
probably I'll try that, and then when we have the stable environment, I will also resume the work on P4C first.
Okay, and Marian, just so you know, the workflow that I described allows you to work on the side without worrying about ACR. You can just use your own repo, or even you can use mine to do like development Dockers, and then we can move it over to ACR easily. So there's no dependency. You can really just keep working the way you are, and we can forklift it later. But maybe you want to take a look at my PR, and then we can have a one-on-one if you want, just to iron it out. There's a lot of ways to get there without hassle or bureaucracy.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, great. So, Marian, did you want to present your PR? Or did you have something you wanted to present this time now that we've we've done what I want to do, which was look at the diagram. So did anyone else want to present something, or Marian, did you?
Yeah, I'll stop sharing unless anyone still wants to look at this. It's online.
Well, yeah. Okay, I have a couple.
Okay.
Just I'll paste the link here in case anyone wants to stare at a schematic drawn by a hardware engineer.
Yeah, 1 second. I'll need to reload my application. Able to share. All right. Yeah, so this one is about SAI API generation. It's backward compatible, but it's got improvements. First of all, it's a better documentation. Second, it allows for utilizing SAI metadata tooling in the code implementation. So what it does is that let me see. Probably the best way to describe this would be to go to the SAI template. Everything else is just technical stuff that is a result of this template. So we have some objects and entries that have attributes of other objects. So for example, we have ENI, and it's got an attribute of VNet ID. And we have also, actually, let's stay with ENI. We also have ENI that has attributes of the ACL group IDs. And the difference between those two is that VNet ID is mandatory. You cannot create ENI that does not belong to any VNet. You can change the VNet later if needed. That's a possible scenario, but you cannot create ENI that is outside of the VNet. ACL, as opposed to that, ACL is optional. And how it is defined in the P4 model, if we go here, I think we have that already. where is the VNet table? Let me find the VNet table. Route. No, I guess we don't have it yet. Maybe ENI. Okay, so if we have in the P4 model the table, by the way, all of these kinds of tables will need to be fixed up to look like that. If we have that by default, it should drop a packet, meaning if we cannot classify this packet to anything, we need to drop it, either be it for ENI or VNet, which I showed that needs to be fixed. If we have this kind of condition, it means that that the pipeline does not allow a miss on that table, meaning that the one that references this, be it ENI ID or the one that will reference in the action that will set that VNet ID or ENI ID, they must be, these attributes must be mandatory. So this is what this change is about. So in the template for filling the attributes, we have, let me see, where is it? So we have these parameters. Now there is a heuristics in the generator that looks in the table, into the table that we are pointing to, and looks if that table is drop on miss. If it is drop on miss, we will set this piece of metadata that is passed to the template. And if the parameter is pointing to an object ID that is mandatory, we will set flags mandatory on create. We also allow create and set. But the difference is that we make it mandatory so that it cannot be set to null. So that we see, right, so we do not allow setting this attribute to null. So this is the change, and what it results in the SAI API is that attributes like VNet ID, ENI ID, whatever object ID that we have there, they will be now, they will become mandatory. So this is the change, and also similar thing for let's see, hold on. So this was the parameter. Let me expand that because I'm a little bit lost where we are. So we are iterating over the parameters. So this is valid for every parameter. And I think this is the difference is that this is for oh, sorry, this is just the action selector. Oh yeah, this is just the action selector, and the attribute, and also we need to fix the parameter itself. So we are removing this allow null as well, and we make a condition, basically the same thing as it was before. We either so this is more related to SAI metadata. If it's mandatory, then the tag should be condition, else it should be valid only in case if the action selector is right. So this stuff was there before. Now it's just to conform to SAI metadata. But the main change is here, and I will also raise as a reference to this pull request a SAI change, so it will be more clear to look at the example what exactly changed. But right now I'm a little bit blocked by the SAI itself, so we need also changes to SAI metadata checker that doesn't allow that for non-object IDs. So as soon as this one will be merged, it was approved already. As soon as it will be merged, this pull request and corresponding SAI APIs, SAI API changes will be unblocked as well.
Marian, is
Yeah,
this
Marian,
the one
just a
you
quick.
submitted
Yeah.
today in the site?
Sorry?
Is this the PR you talked about in the SAI call?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Marian, just a quick question on your change. Thanks a lot for doing that. So this, for the mandatory parameter, are you only taking care of just the create side of it, or if the mandatory parameters are required in other than because if we support this CRUD APIs, right? So why limit only to create?
I'm not limiting them to create, they are create and set.
So
But
this
they are
takes care of.
mandatory.
But how about if there are any parameters required in the whether the read or update or delete? I didn't see the any flag or metadata specifying that thing as well.
So okay, let me maybe open some example. So here is one of the attributes for which this metadata will change. So what I'm proposing to do is to create, to change the flags from create and set to mandatory on create and set. So the operations that you will be able to do is to pass this attribute when you call create API. And also you will be able to do SAI API ENI attribute set and change VNet ID. And so you will be able to create an ENI with the VNet. You will be able to change VNet ID. You won't be able to delete VNet ID attribute, meaning that you won't be able to set it to null because those two flags will be removed.
Quick nitpick here. The ACR group below that is the same, which is surprising.
ACL group will be different. So ACL group is not mandatory because this table does not, it is not a drop on miss.
I understand what you're saying, but the attributes that you describe are exactly the same. So it kind of looks to me like it makes it mandatory of sort. I understand what you're trying to do.
No, so this won't be mandatory. Only VNet ID will be mandatory.
Well, when I look at, okay, maybe I missed something. You're showing the new generated API, right?
No, sorry, I don't have the new one because it will not pass the checks yet because it's blocked by metadata checker right now. So I'm still waiting for that. Yeah.
All right, so I understand.
It's the old
one. Okay.
So
Marian,
I'm showing the old one,
Marian?
and yeah, just one thing as compared to the old API. So this is a good example. What will change? This ACL group ID won't change. So we can create ENI without attaching any ACLs to it, which is perfectly fine. But we cannot create ENI without VNet. So we will require to set this attribute, making these flags mandatory on create and set. and we won't allow this. So allow null will be not set to true. And there will be no default because it's mandatory in create.
In that
But it
case,
seems like,
VNet will become mandatory, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And there'll be interdependency. Both have to be created.
Yeah. That's the intention.
Marian, does this auto-generate constraint checkers in libSci to validate that the API?
No, because this is part of SAI metadata library, which is generated by SAI tooling itself.
The way I see this thing, Marian, is that, you correct me if I'm wrong, your objective here is to ensure that we are auto-generating some validation code, right, for the SAI API, such that when you are, with your, right, so from your tool, from your auto-generation tool, you are going through this P4 code and then determining which parameters are essentially going to be mandatory, and then also what should be their allowed value, so to speak, right? Like saying whether or not you're allowing null or not allowing null, and whether or not these are the mandatory or these are the optional parameters, so forth. So, so this is So then so in that case, what happens is we have this one is like an intermediate representation, not the intermediate representation, but at least the .h file with all these flags that setting this thing, and then the next set of changes that are interpreted by the code is when they generate actual implementation code, right? To say that how I'm going to generate the implementation code of the validation, so I can just take it from all the information on this these header files in the comment section as a metadata.
Well, it's not even, one thing is that it's not even for the library implementation. It's one layer above if it's used, actually. So libSci Redis, if we're speaking about Sonic, libSci Redis utilizes all this metadata to do sanity checks even before call gets to SAI library itself. So that's what it's intended to. So if you look at a Sonic and from end-to-end point of view, between the org agent and the SAI library, there is an RPC, which also has a responsibility of verifying this metadata. So it will not allow you to do a SAI API call to create ENI, for example, without this attribute best.
Shouldn't the library do that too?
Sorry?
Shouldn't the library do that too to protect itself?
Libraries do that optionally, but the thing is that this is let's say the unified way to do that and to handle the errors, and you don't really depend on the vendor library to have a unified sanity checking.
Got it. Could be another discussion someday, maybe. So we have some questions.
Speaking of this, what is part of the Sonic versus what is basically, in the SAI and so forth, right? I mean, I just want to refer to one point. I don't know whether this came out as a discussion on this one, but in the previous meeting, last week's meeting, there was a discussion that, Sonic caches or basically has some shadow state, right? And then there was a question about, okay, for the get part, right? That we weren't going to either fully implement or fully generate, since Sonic does this thing, right? So shouldn't the SAI implementation be NOS agnostic? Why should we basically depend and say that, okay, only Sonic will be running on SAI and no other NOS will be running on this side?
No, I mean, you can do that. I think every SAI vendor provides that for at least the switch SAI, which is used outside of Sonic. But there is a question of priorities, and I'm not really saying that it's invalid to do that. I'm just saying that I don't wish to do that right now.
I have a question about when you generate this mandatory object in your Jinja template. Sorry, in your SAI API gen _ pi. You look at the table name, you know, like deny on this, and you assign mandatory as true. So your code generator is the one that has the business intelligence to make these relations, right?
Well, it figures it out from P4 code. So if the table in P4 has drop on miss policy, and it will treat this table as mandatory.
Is there another way to do it where we use an attribute in the P4 code, like an annotation? So that, because to me, this is sort of like a hidden side effect. And couldn't we put it explicit in the P4 code where we have an annotation?
Yeah, but
instead
it's
of mandatory?
natural.
Pardon me?
It's natural. It's not like a workaround.
I didn't call it a workaround. I'm just saying the level at which it exists is kind of, if you're reading P4 code, you won't see this relation, right? It's inferred, and you have to understand the code generator to know how this propagates. Whereas if you put in the P4 code, you know, annotation, mandatory, or something like that, which you can put on virtually any entity, you can do an annotation, you can generate it from that. And that's the single source of truth versus a code generator, which has a little bit of black magic in it. Just an idea.
I had a similar question as well. But before that, I had a basic question. So when you say depends on the drop on miss, so for example, in this example here, right? So this ENI table is drop on miss, but are you saying that you'll depend on the VNet table's drop on miss to determine whether VNet ID is mandatory?
Yeah, you'll need to look at the table that matches on that ID.
Both will be drop on miss, right? So VNet.
No, so my question. No. So my question is, the ENI table has both types of attributes, right? It has VNet ID, which has to be mandatory. It has ACL group ID, which is not mandatory. So it is not dependent on that table itself. It's dependent on the table to which this attribute is pointing to.
Right.
So now I think similar to what Chris is asking, my question is also that, is it true that in every case where it's pointing to a drop on this table, it will always be mandatory? Because there could be multiple tables where we could be deriving the VNet ID from, and some tables it could be optional, some tables it could be mandatory. Isn't it better to have, say, in the at name attribute or something, right, for the P4? Can we have some tag there to indicate that this is a mandatory attribute?
I think that ACL is not drop on miss. Is there?
Yeah, in this specific example, it works out, but I'm saying, is that true for every case? That in every case, it will be always true that anytime a table is pointing, a table attribute is pointing to a drop on miss, it is always mandatory. Can we just make that assumption? It was not sure.
You're saying that if there is a drop on miss result on any table, those tables should become mandatory. Those objects should be mandatory.
I don't think you want to do that, because looking at that table may be optional. You're just defining the default. If you're looking into that table and you don't find entries, that's what you define the deny, the drop. But that still requires to do the lookup itself. And there's nothing in the code or in the P4 structure that says this is a mandatory table, right?
Yeah. So to derive this
okay, but why would you set that? So you have a field, you have a metadata field. Why would you set a metadata field that you will not later match on? I think it's even providing you with like a way to catch bugs in either the implementation or in configuration.
You take an example. You get a result here. You get a result that is you get a field that could be used for an ANCAP, but you could also use it for a lookup, like alcohol or whatever. It doesn't mean that the lookup you potentially do is mandatory. So there's nothing that says a lookup is mandatory. So if you do the lookup, yes, but there's nothing that tells, I mean, if it's based on a flag on a packet that you do the lookup, there, again, I see what you want to do. And I think having I think Chris mentioned that having a dedicated parameter to say on the table, this is a mandatory field. Actually, that's a mandatory metadata. It's a whole lot better. It's explicit, and you don't have this behavior that sometimes may not be applicable.
Yeah, I guess one other example would be like if the VNet ID was being derived in the pipeline in two different tables. For example, let's say there's ENI foo, and which is also giving VNet ID. And further down the pipeline, you have some kind of P4 logic to decide which wins. And then that's the one which finally goes to VNet ID lookup, VNet table lookup. Yeah, maybe one of the tables can just omit that attribute. Right. So there could be some pipeline logic. Are we trying to like outguess the semantics of the pipeline by doing this in the generator?
Yeah, I think I'm trying to do that for the reasons that I don't want to go manually and mark these parameters as mandatory. That's my intention.
Seems to me like that's hiding expertise in the code generator and knowledge that probably ought to just be explicit. I mean, is it that hard to mark up the P4 code? What's the motive?
To not do it manually and not miss it.
But whoever creates the table has kind of the responsibility to say this is kind of mandatory chain, part of the mandatory chain, right?
Yeah, but I think one of the things, guys, you know, if we say that the only source of truth is P4, then why overload anywhere else, like, you know, whether generation code or try to do this thing. I mean, I agree that, you know, we should have a single source of truth from where we generate these APIs. And if that means that we have to have certain annotations in the P4 code to help us generate this thing, then we ought to discuss that.
I mean, the P4 stays the source of truth. The question is it a law that you need to have it mandatory or not? This is what we're trying to find out.
I think it does have the documentation of somebody trying to understand what are my basic required fields, even when you do data plane or when you do config, like a libsci. If I know that some fields will always be there on the create, I can do my backend may be optimized one way or another. So it's an indication that might be used. It's documented.
There's another motivation, and that is people may use this tool chain but make their own libsci code generator. And the P4 info is the starting point for all this metadata. People can write tools to create libraries just like we did here. If the information is in the P4 info that comes out of the P4 code, people can do what they want with it. They don't have to recreate buried business logic somewhere. You know, the P4 annotations are very flexible, and people don't even use half the power of them. Besides just scalar annotations, like with the parenthesis, there's structured annotations with square brackets, where you can put key value pairs and all kinds of different constructs inside an annotation. That's very rich data. So, you know, we don't have to go that way, but even just having an annotation mandatory.
Oh, by the way, not sure if, since you're talking about annotation, I'm not sure if P4 supports annotations for parameters. I'm not sure about it.
We do have an @name parameter for attributes where we actually specify the SAI API name. So I was wondering we could put something in there to annotate that this is mandatory.
No, but we don't have annotations on the parameters.
Don't be so sure.
We do have on the table attributes, right? Before table attributes, we specify the name of each attribute.
Of each key, right?
Key and action parameters.
And action parameters. Okay, I'll need to look for the example.
Yeah, I've done extensive work with that stuff where I auto-generated web UIs based on annotations on P4 code. So there's a lot of tricks you can play that most people don't go into. Also, I think if you look at SOniC pins, they might be using annotations to sort of relate P4 code to SOniC or SAI code.
We are,
Yeah.
but yeah. Yeah, the question is, we can specify what is mandatory using annotations. The pipeline is the way it is, and it is very clear that add-on misses in certain place where the stateless lookups are before that, right? And they absolutely become mandatory regardless, right? I mean, always for a decision to add on miss later, right? So yeah, if it's needed, we can use it. That's the decision you need to make.
So does someone need to go do research about the annotations or something
I'll
else?
tell you what, I'll
Yeah,
volunteer
looks like
to
in
take.
our code.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Chris, maybe just leave a comment under
Yeah.
under the
Oh.
pull request. I don't really have a strong opinion, but for me it would be easier to just do it once and follow this rule. If you think it's too strict, okay, let's do it manually.
Not that it's strict, it's just where
The
it's,
API will be the same anyway.
I'll volunteer to do a little experiment, Marian, and annotate some parameters and make a branch, and you can look at the output of the P4 info. How's
Yeah,
that?
that's fine. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other PRs you wanted to display, Marian?
So there is the bulk API.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong. Bulk API. So it's straightforward. I'll just need to complete it, but the idea is to support the definition. Okay, let's go to the definition. So for instance, we have entries, we have objects. Each of them has bulk create and bulk remove. So objects follow the signature of a generic SAI bulk object create function. I'll show you an example of that. And entries are have a unique signature due to the structure definition. So we want to provide implementation for those in scilab for BMV2. So it results in 4 new implementations that simply rely on the non-bulk functions. So we have SAI create for objects. So this is the signature. We have switch ID, number of objects we want to create, number of attributes, 2-dimensional list of those attributes, bulk operation error mode. I will talk about that. Object ID, list of object IDs, and list of status. So in this function, we simply go over all of the object count and call a singular SAI create API for the same object type. And there are two modes of operation. There is stop on error, or alternatively to proceed till the end. So there is an aggregate status, which is this one in the function signature, which will signal status success if all of the calls succeeded, or status failure if only one succeeded. If at least one failed. And in case of stop on error, we will stop calling SAI for the next objects as soon as we get the first failure. So this is based on the previous support, and this will be used in the tests.
Where is the rollback part in the case of a failure?
There is no rollback. Rollback is not part of SAI implementation. You just return the list of statuses. It's responsibility of
the caller?
Yeah, of the caller to go over the statuses and figure out what they want to do with that. Okay,
so basically you spend a array of statuses, and then but you fail. You stop on the first failure.
If this is the mode, so there is a mode that tells you to, okay, you can proceed even if one object failed, or there is a mode that tells you to stop. If the mode chosen by the caller is to stop, we'll stop. We'll just return.
So in that case, when you stop on first failure, what is the status of the remaining one? Not tried or not attempted?
Undefined. We didn't even try, so they shouldn't even look at it. Same as we didn't fill anything in the object ID list. The values that were passed to us beyond that object ID that failed will not be filled to anything.
And so it's the caller's responsibility to initialize it to undefined, and then when it goes back, okay.
All of the information needed for the caller will be there. If he chose stop on error, he will have to only process those up until the error in the object statuses list. Not sure which one SOniC is using, but we support both.
Oh, one thing that didn't occur to me, did you consciously avoid using, let's say, the equivalent in P4 runtime of bulk APIs just to keep things simple?
I don't think we really want to do something that is optimized for performance. If we'll need to, I'll rewrite that. But for now, it's just relying on what we have.
Probably just good for people to know that, the assumption here, we're just calling the single object accessors over P4 runtime, because for BMV2 performance is not going to be an issue of the control plane. But if you were doing this like for production, well, probably wouldn't do this anyway. You'd want to bulk up the low-level API. So if a DPU vendor is looking at this and using it as a model to implement their own SAI backend, they'd probably want to not call single accessors, right, and bulk them up themselves for their API.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this API is still on a per object type. It's not a real bulk, right? Like a call is only addressing, like, maybe you can configure like different ENIs at once, but you cannot do one call and configure ENI and some other stuff, right?
Yeah, and it's not expected by the SAI API.
So we don't expect to actually bulk
this
across types.
Right, so this one will be added only to the API struct of the corresponding object type. And that's how it's supposed to be used.
No, but then what is the meaning of object count if it is only on single object?
No, single object type.
Oh, single
could add
object type. Okay.
You could add
Yeah, yeah.
10,000 ACL rules in one call,
Okay.
right?
Okay, got it.
Saves a lot of round trip time.
Okay, and that's fine. So in the future, there will be no ever any kind of requirements to support across types.
Yeah, I think that like if you look at the NOS as a whole, be it Sonic or any other one, trying to even combine all of those will require to maybe do some abstraction in the NOS layer as well and take care of the dependencies, because there will be some, if you want to bulk anything, you can't really bulk anything. You'll need to order them. Having it on one object type makes things easier.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Thanks.
So we are running at 5 minutes till the end of the call. Anyone else have something they wanted to bring up this week?
I have a tidbit on ACL. Looking at the SAI APIs, the IP addresses, they don't look like prefixes, but they should be, right?
Could be a bug.
Okay.
You want to
should I just-
display, Vincent? Or-
I don't have it. I
That's
don't have
okay.
it on hand.
Okay.
Let me just open an issue so it's tracked, and you can just say it's a bug or not. But I would have expected like a prefix in an ACL, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Should be
I'll-
prefix.
The prefix is in the P4 code, but not in the side generated header. Is that what you're saying?
I haven't rechecked the P4. Let me do all that check, and I'll open an issue if I find something. Definitely at the side level, on the attribute itself, it's an address, not a prefix. But I'll triple check all that.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else have a burning issue before we end? No? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. And I'll